What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to look back at Bayonetta, another all-time great, another classic, 2009, right? All of these games, 2009, the 15-year anniversary. It's insane how many new IPs were born in that year. And this just being another one. Now, technically, I'm a little late to the 15-year anniversary. First came out in October 29th of 2009, and this has been a franchise that's done very, very well for itself, right? Now, one thing I didn't even really realize, I think of Platinum Games, and I actually really respect Platinum Games. I think they make a lot of really good stuff. I didn't know, at the time, well, number one, Mad World was the first game that this newly assembled studio had ever made, right? They had the idea of 4 games, right? Mad World, Bayonetta, Vanquish, and then Anarchy Reigns, and they didn't really know what order the games were going to come out in, but those were the 4 games they were working on. Now, Mad World, I actually remember that game back from the GameFly years. I used to have the subscription service to GameFly, and Mad World on the Wii was actually one of the first games I ever got. I actually think that game is really, really cool. Maybe we can do a video on that eventually on this channel. But then it was Bayonetta, and both of those came out in 2009. And then you had Vanquish, which I think is another all-time classic. I have that physically as well, and that came out in 2010. So Platinum Games really, I think they started super, super strong. You know, you had Metal Gear Rising Revengeance in there. You had The Legend of Korra, which is maybe the only above-average Avatar game that we've ever gotten in our lives. Recently, it's been obviously Nier Automata, but recently it's been a little bit less so, right? Babylon's Fall, Bayonetta 3 had a lot of controversy, and, in a way, they've lost their way, but they started very strong. And Bayonetta, again, just one of these all-time 2009 classics. Now, what tends to happen with these games that I want to discuss in this video as well is they normally do, 1 or 2 things very strong, and then, they're kind of rough around the edges. I think if you look at a lot of these 2009 franchises, they're not perfect. The Dragon Age Origins of the world was a franchise that started this year in 2009. Infamous, Prototype. These are not perfect games, but these are games that are very, very strong, and they do a couple things extremely well. And then, they're a little bit weaker in other aspects. And actually, that is literally Bayonetta 2 at sea, right? This is a game that has flair. This is a game that has style. I actually think style was a word used in a lot of reviews for this game, so I'm kind of stealing it. It had a lot of style. It just, this is a game that constantly moves, and I really, really like that about this game. It's got a really important, I'd say, main character, right? A female character that is so, I don't know, almost larger than life. Actually, the entire game is kind of larger than life, right? Because you have things about heaven and hell and that kind of the themes of almost religion there. But you have a character that is really over the top, in terms of some of the moves that she does and her looks. And I think they do it really well because she has that feminism, sexy kind of thing, but she's also super, super cool. This is not a character that makes that has her look like this just to flaunt her and there's nothing else there, right? She's got that cool factor. She's got that badass factor to her. I think that's really important for her character that they captured kind of immediately. But it's, it's surprising to me watching it and when her hair will, kind of spring up and she'll form the demons, right? And what they're showing or what they're kind of implying of showing, it is actually kind of wild what they were able to accomplish in 2009 that I don't think and I think, I haven't actually played Bayonetta 2 or 3 ever, so I don't know if this 1,000%, but I do think they've kind of in terms of the showing things and all that, I think they've dumbed it down or, brought it back kind of down to earth versus what they used to have it. But, I don't know if I would say that's a massive part to it, but Bayonetta, herself, she is pretty important. She doesn't talk all that much, and I would say that kind of does highlight the major weakness that this game has. Again, in terms of the rough around the edges stuff, the story and the characters are not strong in this game, right? She doesn't talk a lot. The story is, because it jumps so much, and I mean, this game is literally just all over the freaking place. It's hard to fully convey the story that's going on. It's, I don't know, it's simplistic enough, you can follow it, but it's nothing massively interesting. It's not going to blow your socks away, with a gripping narrative and these characters that, again, she has a cool factor. She became kind of an icon in that way, but it doesn't have anything that kind of puts it over the top. What it does have to put it over the top is everything else, right? Because the gameplay here, really, I think going into that Devil May Cry kind of area, the gameplay in this game is just so freaking fun. And I personally love how it's broken up, right? So it does the grading kind of thing that Devil May Cry and other games have done it, but this one really breaks it up, right? Breaks it up into verses and verse, a musical type thing. And, that's how this entire game is. So, a chapter might have 12 verses and, each one is kind of grading you on your performance, and at the end you kind of get an overall grade, right, with tokens and other stuff, and currency to go into the store and buy things. A lot of those things are relatively simplistic, but it's always kind of there watching you, right? You always feel like you're being watched to perform at a high level, and I think that that's good kind of pressure, especially for a fast-paced game for this, because this is a game like you're always going. Like, I was just mashing different combination of Y and B on the Xbox controller. I was just going wild. Just like, okay, I've bought a couple new abilities or new like moves, and it's like, let me just see what I'm able to do as her. And I was pulling off things in like hours 3, 4, 5, 6. I was pulling off things that I had never seen before, in terms of like move sets. So I feel like this game does that very organically, very naturally, and it's a lot of fun. Like, this is actually the part where I feel like the video is gonna really shorten because you can't really talk about it too much. This game's just a blast. It's high flying. The way that they, I would say, like transition between like cinematic moments. It reminds me a lot of like God of War, but even more kind of wild, because you have like that big, the higher scale, like bigger enemies that are kind of like larger than life. You have the mixing of quick time events, which, this was the era of doing that, right? 2009, 2010. It started to get less and less popular as the years go, but this was still kind of the height of it. I actually really liked it, kind of because when I got into the PS3 and 360 generation, it was literally 2009. I got my PS3 in June of 2009, so I was growing up as a very early teenager with these games. These are the games that like defined me, so I really like quick time events, and I specifically like how this game handles it. Honestly, like the torture attacks and stuff, I like them a lot. Like just spamming, I'm really good. You'll probably see from the gameplay, I'm really good at like doing things quick. I've done like the clicking test on the mouse before, and I'm like highly above average. Like I'm extremely good with it. So I don't know, it's like a test for me. So like any time that you have to mash like X, right, to like do more damage to an enemy, I'm freaking going at it like faster than the speed of sound and getting some of the better scores you can get. And it just, you mix that in with really cool combos, and you're always getting graded for that, and just these cinematic kind of action scenes, or somewhat on rails. Like I'm thinking of Route 66, or I don't know if it's 666, I kind of forget the chapter name, but you're on a bike, right, the entire time, and like that's an interesting one too. Like there's a lot of things they'll throw at you to kind of break it up. You'll face enemies that kind of are bosses, and the bosses, I don't really want to say they become sub-bosses, because they actually throw like 3 of those bosses at you at a time, but it has a really cool formula of recycling enemies and then introducing enemies you haven't seen before. It's got huge over-the-top, boss fights. Like in that way, it very much reminds me of God of War. Now this, 2009, the next year, 2010, I think in March, so maybe like 6 months after this game came out, was God of War 3, right? And that's a huge game that like defined me growing up, and that kind of had a lot of similarities, I would say, to Bayonetta. So yeah, I just had a blast. Like it's not a perfect game. There's definitely weaknesses here and there, and it primarily is the story and the characters, but this is a game that I love its tempo, I love its speed, I love its action. I think it does that Devil May Cry kind of formula with judging you and giving you scores. It does that well. It has like more on rails type sections. It's got the God of War-ness to it, where you're fighting these larger than life enemies. Like I don't know, I feel in terms of like, does it hold up now? Like, can you that's really what I try to do with a lot of these games. And again, we've covered so many 2009, like the Borderlandses of the world and all that stuff. Do they still hold up to this day? I think they do. I think that combat, while it kind of got like too familiar with people, and I think people turned their back on that kind of more hack and slash like combat, I've always loved it. And again, it's probably because I grew up with it. Maybe that's not the only reason, but for me, I actually kind of got sad when we got away from it. And I feel like nowadays people are more willing to accept that combat than they were maybe in like 2013, 14, 15. People and developers were moving away from this style. I feel like it still has more life in it, and like a renaissance that could be brought back. But I also think just, from this channel and me playing all of these old games, I have a blast. I always have a blast when I go back and I play these type of games from, 2005 to 2012 or whatever. Like, this was a great era that I think really, that combat still holds up to me. It really does. Like, that combat is fun. It's fast-paced. It has a little skill required. It's not just mashing buttons. Like, in my head, I kind of know what I'm doing, right? I am mashing, but there's combos I'm trying to accomplish when I'm doing it. I feel like it's kind of timeless, that kind of fighting style. So I really love this game. I'm excited because, I have played this before. I played Bayonetta 1, not all the way, but I have played played it before. Bayonetta 2 and 3 I've never played before. I've played Vanquish, I've played other, Platinum games, but I do kind of want to go through the Bayonetta series at some point on this channel. So this is the starting point. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.